Okay, so a lot of you know I'm a huge quote person. I'm also a huge Stephen Covey person. If you haven't read The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, it's a wonderful book. But let's take a quick look at this as we talk about communication. I think the main takeaway, I'm hoping you beyond getting a few tools and a few things to work on. My main goal is to help us appreciate how complex communication is. We're doing it every day, all the time, with all kinds of different people. But I want us to stop and really reflect on how important it is and how difficult it is. And obviously, we only have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through these things. But don't hesitate to reach out if any of it resonates with you. But anyway, Covey's quote here, this idea of rejecting or prejudging someone's content, listening, not looking to receive information, but to judge information. We got to be very, very careful with that. And that really it's not about how smart we are. It's about recognizing that there are other points of view. There are other ways that people are going to look at things. And the better off or the more capable we are of receiving their input and their information, the better their communication flow is going to go. So just a quote, and we're going to have several of these throughout. So let's dive in here to this idea of why is communication difficult, and maybe you don't think it is. Maybe you think, no, I'm a real good communicator. But again, my hope is to show you through these slides that there are real challenges and that it is a really complex process. And so we start thinking about, why is it hard? And this is not an exhaustive list, but the point is to start kind of giving you some ideas of why it's hard to communicate. First one, the abstract nature of language. Okay. I hold this pen up and I go, that's a pen, right? And this is a cup. And we just come up with these letters. We weave them together as human beings, and we all agree that a cup is a cup and a pen is a pen. And those are easier because there's an object related to them. But what if we now talking about justice, right? And I use the word justice, and you're thinking maybe that's more punitive. Maybe I'm thinking more equitable or fair, right? So language in and of itself that we have cobbed together doesn't always suit us, even if we've got a really big thesaurus of language. It sometimes leaves us short. I think we think we're better communicators than we are. So there's this sort of overconfidence in our ability to package a message in a way that's able to be received. I think we are poor listeners as a society. I don't know, how much work Chad had to do, but to be a therapist like Chad has been, I'm sure he had to really work on his listening skills. I think when we get coached as athletes, we have to work on our listening skills. But in general, we're poor listeners. We're very unaware of our own biases. 100, Chad would know better than me, but 160 some biases that we all have built into us, hardwired into us, that that for the most part are valuable tools of sorting information. As information's flying at us, we're able to discard, grab a hold of, filter. Okay, but then those same biases are oftentimes not serving us well and causing us to prejudge ideas, discount ideas. Okay, um, the knowledge curse, especially when you get into a middle management role. Now, all of a sudden, maybe I've been in these meetings for years on why we're going to roll this strategy out. And I go now to try to communicate that to my subordinates who haven't been in those meetings for a year, but I assume they know all that context and I don't communicate it to them. Okay. We don't give them the full picture of why we're doing this or the impact it's going to have just because we assumed and just thought they knew already. Stephen Covey in that Seven Habits of Highly Effective People spends a lot of time talking about the difference between urgent and important. And as a society, we spend so much time in the urgent category. So urgent is that fire I walked into work and had to put out, the phone that's ringing. Even nowadays, we're getting to, if I get a text, I got to respond immediately, right? All these sort of sense of urgency. Um, it then what it ends up doing is affects your communication skills because you're feeling rushed. Okay. And yet we don't spend enough time in what he calls the important quadrant, which is, where real change happens, real innovation happens, real relationships are built. And so we got to be aware of that. Fear of vulnerability, especially in a leadership role. I literally, Harry's not on the call, but I referenced, his boss not really knowing how to be a great leader, but unfortunately also not knowing what his subordinates are even doing. And instead of just recognizing that and being vulnerable and saying, hey, yeah, what's this process? How is it? Why has it been this way? People end up kind of faking it till they make it. And that affects communication, right? Because they're acting like they know more than they really do. Again, like leadership, no single right way to communicate. So it's a really situational, very relationship dependent, which makes it more complex. Okay. And so that was not an exhaustive list. But again, the hope is to grab if you got on this call thinking, okay, well, I'm a pretty good communicator, right? I'm trying to get your attention that there's a lot to it. And so I make the joke. This graph I'm about to show you. I make the joke that when I wrote my book, I thought I'd have a graphics person on my team. I did not have a graphics person on my team. So these are my graphics. And so when we think about the two-way communication process, this is what we think of initially, right? I'm sending out a message. Someone's going to receive the message. Okay. And that's an overly simplistic view of the communication process. And I'm going to try to walk you through some of the components quickly that make this up. So first off, when you're sending the message, you've got to encode it. You've got to choose the right words. You got to choose what my intention is, my approach. Okay. And I got to start to package this. Again, I'm a spy guy. I'm a special forces guy. I love thinking about, sending messages in code and whatnot. So when we use the word encoding, that's what we're talking about. I'm trying to put this thing together so my receiver can understand what I'm talking about. Okay. And so we get that effort down. We're going to talk a lot on the back end about advocacy versus inquiry, because very different styles, very different outcomes. Then I got to deliver the message. Okay. And that'll change by medium, right? So is it a written message? Is it an oral message? Okay. If it's an oral message, by in person, not in person. And obviously we learn a lot from nonverbal communication. I love thinking about this, right? We get so many emails, right? Does everybody get a lot of emails? I get a lot of emails. So you get an email, right? And your boss sends an email, but they can't see you go. Could you imagine if nonverbal communication was present every time you received that email, that you're like, oh my God, I got a guy on my football team, Mike Michalakis, when we're going through that Hall of Fame stuff, would send a billion emails. And you would just see it come in your inbox and you would have this nonverbal communication of like, oh boy, here we go, right? Or paraverbal, okay? My kids know this, Amy knows this, paraverbal with things like tone, your volume, your pitch, your speed. Those are paraverbal communication techniques. And so if I've encoded a good message, but I've got poor paraverbal skills, my message is getting changed in the process. It's now a loaded message. If you see the arrows at the bottom, then I got to choose what channel I'm going to use. Am I in person? Is it over the phone? Is it via text? Is it via email? Okay, all of them do different things better. They all have advantages and disadvantages, and we'll look at those. Actually, won't have time today to get into those, but so now we're thinking, okay, I've got it down. I got my speech down. I'm going to control my emotions. Okay, I'm going to do it in person so they can see all this. I do all that, and then hopefully that person is going to decode the message right. But as we know, they don't always do that. Meaning, I could have been very careful in these first three steps and really, really did a nice job presenting this topic in a way that I thought was meaningful. And yet my listener got biases, or my listener has trauma around this area because their last boss made them do this or that or the other. Okay. Or maybe they have no listening skills at all, right? Maybe they're disengaged. So now all of a sudden the communication breaks down, even though I've done 2/3 of it really, really well, the decoding part breaks down. Okay. And now we're still struggling. And so we think, okay, I'm hoping you're looking at that and you're saying, man, that's a lot. That's a lot of ways for this to sort of break down. It is, and we're not done. And we're not done with the best graphic. Are you guys ready? On the edge of your seats? Boom. Look at that. Look at that. Noise, right? So you think about what do we mean by noise? All kinds of noise. There's actually, ambient noise, like I ask Amy to close her door right over. I didn't want to be distracted. But there's all kinds of other noise, right? You're aware of these, the things that cloud up your ability. Maybe it's distraction. So my message gets changed. I started thinking about maybe even the second step in this process. And now the first step wasn't delivered well because I'm on to the second step. I'm a hungry guy, right? So if I'm hungry, I'm hangry, right? And so now all of a sudden I'm thinking about, or if you're tired, you're fatigued, those are all noise factors, right? That are now making the message more difficult to get through. And again, we're not done yet. So now we finally, hopefully, some by miracle, this person on the other end receives our message. Well, then they've got to give us feedback. And again, if we're in person, it may be an eye roll, may not. Maybe they draw closer to you and they're actually more engaged, and that's fantastic. Okay. Or maybe you've made them mad and now they're in an advocacy mode to win the argument. They heard you all the way out and they went, nah, that's not what we're going to do. And now they're going to fight to win. Okay. And so then they're sending a message back to you that, of course, is loaded, and I've got to filter and decode, and it's going to go through my biases. It's going to go through my listening skills, my experiences, my personality. Okay. And then obviously the process starts over again. Okay. So beyond showing you how great I am at graphics, I'm trying to show you the complexity that we take for granted because we don't think about this stuff. We just jump in and start talking, right? And there's just a lot going on. So that's this two-way communication process that's really, really important. And one of the key components in there, beyond nonverbal, paraverbal, is this idea of advocacy versus inquiry, right? And so when you look at advocacy versus inquiry, what you're looking at is sort of two different continuums here. And I like to stop and just think about when you hear the term advocate, I'm going to advocate for something, things come to mind, right? Things come to mind like, I want to get this accomplished. It's important to me. I want to see a result. I'm looking for an outcome, right? I'm asserting myself, to use the image on the graph there. Okay, and that is one style of communication that is important. We need to have it. Both forms are appropriate, but it's only one style. The other style being inquiry. And when you think the word inquiry, what I'm hoping comes to your mind is learning. So now it's not about an outcome or a goal or winning, which is what advocacy is. It's now more a component of what am I able to learn? What am I able to learn here? Okay. And obviously, if you look down in that bottom left corner where we have low advocacy and low inquiry, okay, we have a lot of people work for us that stay in that box, and they're in the observing box. As leaders, we don't want people to just be stuck in the observing box. Think about these folks on your teams you've had, or maybe you have now, you've had them in the past. These are the folks that don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They just want to be a fly on the wall, and they just want to kind of do their job and go home. Okay. And as leaders, we want to draw them out. They could be more than that. We want to inspire them to be more than that. And so as we look at these two approaches in more detail, I hope that you can begin to learn the differences, okay, because they will accomplish different things. A couple things here on why we communicate, okay. If you look on the left-hand side here, as leaders, we're communicating to influence behaviors, influence outcomes, influence results, okay. I think that when we understand that communication is often about influencing something, I think we also understand the inform part. Again, you think there's just a lot of information we've got to get out as a leader to folks so they can make decisions, so they just have all the information they need. You've got this idea of improvement. Okay, a lot of us have been athletes, right? If we don't communicate steps for improvement, we can't expect someone to improve. So a lot of the communication that we're expending are these ideas of change, continuous improvement, innovation. But I would venture to say, if you look to the right side of this group here, okay, and you may have to move all of our talking heads to see it, is this idea of inquiry, okay? And how often are we communicating to clarify, to learn, to clarify expectations, okay, to clarify details? That inquiry piece is really important. We're going to talk about it in the next slide even more. Inspire, okay, as leaders, and some people struggle with the word inspire. It sounds kind of grandiose, like I've got to be some sort of visionary and cast this vision and get everybody so rah-rahed up they want to run through a wall. If you don't like that word inspire, think engagement. How do I communicate that increases engagement? Okay. And that's another a reason a leader might be communicating. And then the final one that I think is even at the very bottom of a work day. Now, I think we find ways outside of work to interact, but just this basic conversation to get to know people, to demonstrate kindness, to empathize with what someone's going through, to build a trusting personal relationship. Most businesses, no time for that. No time for that. Okay, and I taught some of this content earlier today, and someone brought up the great point. It says, really, if you really look at it, the others you can't get done until you interact, right? Until someone knows you care, they don't care what you know. Okay, and yet our system's a little broken because we're not allocating enough time for that just casual interaction to develop those relationships. So what's it look like? And again, I had again my presentation today. I had another great question. He said he was listening to me, and he thought I was pushing them towards being more of an advocate, to taking more of this advocate approach to communication. And that is not at all what I'm trying to get done. What I'm trying to get done is for you to be intentional about the style that you do choose. Don't let it be something that I just did, or I just reacted, or I just jumped in and started talking. Okay? Be intentional about the style of communication that you believe is appropriate for this situation. And generally speaking, one of these two styles is going to be what you're going to want to do. So if we start on the advocacy side, I think it's the easiest to understand because I think we're doing it a lot. Okay? Walk through this. Step one, first priority, I want to win the argument. I want to win because I like winning. I want to win because I like feeling smarter. I want to win because my way is right and the other person's an idiot. But fill in the blanks, right? We want to win. We want to win the conversation. When we are in advocacy mode, that is our primary goal. Okay. And so how we accomplish that is we try to really blow up our sort of expertise, belittle the other person's expertise. Okay. And we defend and justify, is what we're trying to do there. All right. And obviously there are times when we need to advocate for something. There's a lot of topics, human rights and justice and these things that we need to advocate for someone who can't advocate for themselves. There's also times when the whole business needs to go in this direction and we've got to be decisive and there isn't time to really take on a collaborative approach. So again, I'm not saying advocacy is bad. What I'm saying is we default to that too often as leaders. Our default setting is, let me tell you what we need to do. And I'm challenging you to say, no, I'm going to be intentional to have more of an inquiry-based approach. Okay. When you hear the word inquiry, you should think learn. Okay. And I want you just real quick in your head, think of the last handful of conversations you had. How often were you curious? How often were you curious in a conversation? I would argue not very often, right? Because you think you've all got it figured out, or I shouldn't be communicating about it, right? And so curiosity, this idea of a combined pool of meaning. Okay, you're bringing your ideas, I'm bringing my ideas. We're letting those sit together and marinate, and then we'll start to sort out what is the best approach. We're going to collaborate over that. We're going to realize there's multiple ways to get things done. Okay. And so that's what we're looking at with this advocacy inquiry. And so if you look at it on just the practice level, here's what you got, right? And I really want people to take an honest inventory as you go into the week, your week finishes up. How often are you talking from an advocacy mindset versus an inquiry mindset? Okay. Number 3 on the advocacy side, how often are you listening, not to learn, you're listening to form your counter argument, right? That's what advocacy, that's a great indicator that I'm in advocacy mode. I'm not curious. I'm just listening because I'm sharpening my knife to be able to figure out how I'm going to cut you the best when I get my turn. So I hope you shut up soon so I can get my turn in, right? Okay, so again, you look at our political environment, right? These sort of canned phrases, these pre-packaged messages. That's advocacy, right? They say the same thing over and over again about different points, okay? And I'm just encouraging you to be more inquiry based. I know I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to go through this quote real quick. Okay. Um, Look at this. And if you think I'm wrong, you know, Stephen Covey knows a lot. When trust is high, we communicate effortlessly and instantaneously. When trust is high, but when it's low, whew, time consuming, exhausting, ineffective, and inordinately difficult. Trust. Trust is the currency of leadership. We have to have those interactions to build those relationships, to create the trust. So when we communicate, it can move. We can move mountains and we can move things more quickly. You may think communication is a problem. I had an MBA teacher teach me. It took me a long. I'm a slow learner. He took me about a semester of me to learn. Communication is never the problem. Communication is a symptom of another problem. So if you're at a workplace, if you're in a relationship, if you're anywhere, if you're on a team that says we have a communication problem, I would challenge you to do a root cause analysis. Why are we not communicating? Oh, probably because we don't trust each other, or probably because we're both trying to win the argument. Okay. So we have to understand that those leaders that do that research to find the root cause of the communication problem will come out on top. And here's one last quote, and I'll move quickly. All three quotes were from Stephen Covey. That guy knew some stuff, I'll tell you. We're talking about being empathetic. We don't have time to get into that today, but it's a key component of inquiry-based listening. You're dealing with the reality inside another person's head and heart. So just think about that for a second. When you're talking and they're talking, they think they're right and they think that their opinion matters, and you do also. And so you gotta get you in their headspace. So, all right, I'll stop recording, and I know I used up most of our time, but we'll be around for questions and of course